Hey everybody, this is a video about the repair of my 1997 Dodge Ram 3500 dual rear wheel, four-wheel drive pickup truck with a 5.9 liter Cummins 12 valve engine and mechanical fuel pump. Say that 5 times fast. This is my 1997 Dodge Ram pickup, and it's got a Cummins 5.9 liter 12 valve diesel engine with a mechanical fuel pump, considered by many to be one of the best versions of this engine, only because when they went to the 24 valve, if I'm not mistaken, that's also when they changed to an electronically controlled fuel pump. The 12 valve mechanical fuel pump that was used in these, I don't remember the exact name they had for this pump. It's pretty popular though. I'll probably just put it up on the screen. It's considered by many to be a very, very good trouble-free design. If you lose all electrical power in the truck for some reason, this engine will continue to be able to run and get you home. The other interesting thing about these older 5.9 liters is I've run into several people who have had trucks with this engine and high miles and traded them in for newer generation Dodge Rams, newer generation Cummins trucks, and said that they wish they had never done it because that they were noticing that their fuel economy was nowhere near as good. Now, I don't even know what the displacement is. Maybe the new Dodge Cummins are more than 5.9 liter and they're bigger displacement and have more power. I don't know. I've never really had a lack of power from the engine. My lack of power when towing with this truck can all be associated to the very poor stock transmission and torque converter. Matter of fact, even transmission isn't as bad as some people say. It's the torque converter. The stock torque converters really are a mess on these things. So there's things I could do to that transmission and torque converter, change them out to aftermarket and greatly improve that. We're getting off the point here. Okay, so why am I working on this today? Well, there are two issues with this right now. The first issue I've had since I've owned it. I'm the second owner of this truck, but I bought it from a family member who bought the truck brand new. So this is a 1997. He bought it brand new. And when I bought the truck from him several years ago, at that time, I also owned a regular cab Dodge, same year, 97, same engine, same everything. Okay, same exact motor. It was just a regular cab, four-wheel drive. And when I would start that truck, I would never have to step on the pedal to start that truck. Okay, so in other words, the throttle in the off or idle position, turn the key on, wait for the wait to start light to go out so the preheater was stopped, had done its thing, crank the engine, and the engine would start. Cold weather a little bit harder, but that's a diesel. But I mean warm weather, no problem. Truck hot, no problem. Truck cold, no problem. I noticed from day one with this truck that you have to give it pedal to get it to start. In other words, if you sit there and crank the engine without touching the pedal, it won't start. It'll just sit there and crank and crank and crank. You give it a little bit of pedal and it'll start. And then you can take your foot off. Unless it's cold and then it'll stall. But that's also not necessarily abnormal. What's abnormal is that you have to do that. And when I questioned the person I bought the truck from, I questioned him about that. He said it's been like that ever since they did a recall repair on this truck. So I ran the VIN number with the dealer, and sure enough, back in 2003, they replaced throttle linkage and some associated parts in a recall that was issued by Dodge, where they had a problem where those parts would corrode and cause a sticking accelerator situation. So my theory is that back when those guys replaced those parts in 2003, whoever the technician was who installed those parts, he didn't properly set up the linkage adjustments, and that there's some sort of like timing advance or something on the mechanical pump that is not being handled correctly, and that's what the problem is. or the throttle position sensor. There is a throttle position sensor right here. I'm not exactly sure what effect that could have if that's improperly set. Anyways, I lived with that problem the way he lived with it. He had the thing for years after they did the recall, never bothered taking it back and having them fix it. And I lived with it for years after buying the truck from him. But then it developed this other problem, which it's actually been giving me some symptoms for a while, and I'll tell you what those symptoms are. The pedal can be hard to push at first. There's almost like a point where you have to reach a certain breakover pressure, and then all of a sudden the pedal will go down. Also, notice that sometimes the pedal, you can push it a certain distance, and then it gets to a part where it sticks, and then you get past that part, and it's free again. Then I started to notice when I would take my foot off the pedal, it wouldn't return to idle all the way down to idle. It would idle high, or it would still be, the engine would be revving closer to 1,000 or 1,100. Then I replaced one of the two springs that are down there. That didn't seem to do much, but the spring was rusty, so I replaced it. This was a couple years ago. Then on this last camping trip, I had an incident where we were on the highway. I had the cruise control set, and we were going along at a pretty good clip, about 65 miles an hour. We started coming down a hill, started gaining some speed. I shut the cruise control off, and it stayed at the full RPM. And I realized we had a problem. And I ended up having to get off at the next exit, come down to the end of the ramp, really burned up my brakes heavily to get the thing to stop. I mean, I started slowing down as much as I could, but of course it's at full throttle, so it didn't really want to. We get down there, I pop it into neutral, throw it into park, come to a complete stop, jump out, pop the hood, get in there, and manually push the linkage back to get it back down to idle. And the spring was gone. So what's in there right now is there's a spring that I picked up at Home Depot as an emergency repair, and I threw that spring on there, and I was able to get us to the campground and get us back. But even coming home, I noticed it was still sticking. So the wait to start light just went out, so I'll just crank it without any pedal. And it just won't start at all. Now I'll give it just a little bit of pedal. Starts right up. Okay? So that's problem number one. Now, I just took my foot off the pedal, and interestingly enough, well, actually, that's another problem. My tachometer has started to malfunction. Haven't figured out what that is. That's a problem I've seen a couple times, and it goes away, and it's just one of those gremlins that I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. I might end up having to have the dealer or some mechanic. See, look at that. See what just happened? I'm sitting here talking to you guys, and the damn tachometer starts working. All right, so here's the thing. Roughly, we can surmise that that's probably around 800 RPM. Notice how it's coming back. That's how it should work. All right, see when I go to max throttle, I had it floored. Now it's back down, it came down to 1,000 RPM. Now watch this. I'll give it a quick goose. See how it came down? So we got problems with the throttle linkage. All right, so there's a linkage rod assembly there with an adjustment on it, and at the end of that, there are these almost like little U-joint, I forget what you call them, but they're a little like ball joint on the end. and those are known to go bad and get sticky and cause a problem. Also, the pivot points for the linkage can be a problem. You're going to all get a better look at this once I get this opened up. So what I got to do is this hose right here, this big pipe, okay, this comes from the intercooler for the turbo and goes into this intake housing. So we're going to take this housing and this tube out, and that's going to give us, and we're going to try and move this wiring harness right here, and that should give us a lot more access to these parts. Well, that figures. It's starting to rain. All right, well, I got the intake off. Loosen up the clamp. It slides fairly easily off of this pipe. I'm going to get a rag to cover that because that's my intake. That ribbon looking thing right there is your preheater element. That's what actually the voltage goes to, and it gets really hot, and when you're cranking the engine, it sucks the hot air into the engine to help start it, as opposed to like on a GM you've got glow plugs, or on the Ford you got glow plugs. So anyways, enough about that. This is, by the way, this is the system that a lot of the big rigs use. So Cummins basically probably copied their design that they use on their much bigger engines, made a miniature version of it for this. Oh, but I digress. So you can already see I've already got a better view of that linkage. That's it right there. Not much better. I got to get this pipe out. The connection for it's under there, and it's a real pain in the butt to get to, but I noticed it probably wouldn't be that hard to get to that if I take my washer fluid reservoir out, which I have. I think I've had that out before, and I don't think it's that hard to take out. So I think if I disconnect my upper radiator hose and get this housing out, and that'll give me even more access here. Okay, so with that reservoir out and the upper radiator hose moved off to the side out of the way, you lose a little bit of coolant, but not much. Now I have real easy access to that clamp down at the bottom there that's holding this tube in. I also have more access in this direction here, getting to this assembly over here. All right, well, the access is getting better and better. So now if I reach in here and I pull on this linkage, I can definitely feel there's a strange stiffness to it. It's not a very easygoing fluid motion. There's something dragging, I don't know what. So the next step, I unclipped these clips so I can move this wiring harness up a little bit. The next step is to disconnect these 3 cables. There's actually 3 cables that connect here. If you do not have cruise control, you won't have the 3rd cable. If you don't have an automatic transmission, you won't have one of these cables. So one cable goes to the accelerator pedal. One cable is a shift down cable that goes to the automatic transmission. And the other cable, the 3rd cable, goes to the cruise control. So this one here is the cruise control one. That's not going to be the culprit. This is the one that goes to the transmission, I believe, and this must be the one that is the actual pedal. Now, they do occasionally have problems with these cables binding that can cause problems, but that would more than likely cause a problem when I'm pushing the pedal down in the cab. But when I feel binding by moving the linkage manually like this, there's no reason to believe that that's being caused by that cable. This is how this clips on here. You can see it's actually got a notch in it. So you want to actually pull this back and then pop that forward with a screwdriver. This outer one here for the cruise control, this one here, it pops on and off so easily. I'm wondering whether or not that's not in need of replacement. It just seems like it's way too easy to pop that on and off. Well, the rain has held off so far. It just spit a little bit and it stopped, but now it's darkening up again. Anyways, I got all 3 cables disconnected. All right, so that's the rearmost facing end of the rod there, that little swivel device. And it looks like that threads into that linkage right there. So that's the, believe it or not, that one back there is the easier one of the 2. The other one is down underneath this assembly here. It's behind there though, but I think this TPS, throttle position sensor, I think removing this is what gives you better access to that.
I just want to point out, I don't know if you can see, but that's really kind of turned at an odd angle. So the face of that elbow is not parallel to that plate. So it's almost like it's twisted down. So that wouldn't be good. And it seems like it's almost pulling off. And since I'm going to take that off anyways because it's all corroded and rusted, I'm going to see if I can't pop that socket off.
Okay, so that popped off pretty easily. And once I pop that off, now this is unbelievably sloppy. So that socket there at that end is completely worn.
The little ball in there looks okay, but I'm pretty sure the new one's going to come with a new one of those.
All right, the great news for me is that when I reach in there and I work that lever by hand now, that lever moves smoothly, it returns smoothly, and it doesn't hang up at all. So I know it's not the pivot point for that lever back there that's the problem. Wow. So with that linkage disconnected, I'm just trying to move this back and forth, and it's definitely, everything's binding up right in here. So it's not just the sloppy linkage that's my problem. There's something sticking very badly here.
All right, so the next thing I did was I just removed the two springs.
This is what an original one looks like. It's got these plastic things on the end that just clip over the little little studs. Okay, and because there is a notch in the stud, I was able to just clip one of these on. This is a regular hardware spring from Lowe's hardware aisle, and it was an emergency fix.
The reason why I'm getting these springs off is because there are two bolts back there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and remove these two little bolts right here, 1 and 2. And those two little bolts right there should allow me to get that bracket that has that little ball stud off.
Now once you remove the two 8mm bolts that go here and here, this whole assembly comes out. Now if the linkage was still attached to the ball here, obviously this would just drop down. So you could actually leave that linkage attached, but with the linkage out of the way, I think it's a lot easier to get to the bolts. There's clearly an adjustment here. There's a little graph or a little scale, okay, and there's a line that points to a number on that scale, and that can be changed by loosening this. I'm going to leave that alone. Also, the position of the actual ball that the linkage attaches to, there are several different locations it can be placed into on this bracket. So when I take that out and put the new one on, I'm going to want to definitely make note of that. And that is just where the two springs attach to.
All right, so I just removed these two long screws that hold the throttle position sensor on. And I just pulled it off. I sure as heck hope I can get the alignment of that correct when I go to put it back on. Oh, the crud in there. I wonder why these things fail. I wonder if that is what is binding. Nope, this is definitely still binding. It's this.
All right, so now there are, let's see if I can explain this. The light in here and the camera in there. All right, so now there are 3 bolts. One here, one way down at the bottom here, and one on the outside back, looking down from the top, outside back, outside of the bracket, okay? So we take those 3 bolts out, and this whole bracket is made to come off. But before I do that, I already got the connections for this wiring harness disconnected from it. I want to get these 3 grommets out that hold these 3 cables in. All right, so I gotta get these three suckers out.
And that's what it looks like with all of the 3 cables, the restrainers for the cables removed. They're not easy to get out. I can't give you really too many tips other than just work at it and pry at it with screwdrivers. So now with the cable restraints out of the way, it's real easy to get to that bolt that's way down there. And of course the one that's on the outside here, right down there. And the third one's right there. Alright, remove these 3 little bolts. And now that whole bracket assembly with the rod comes out. We can get it out here in daylight and see the anatomy of the beast. Well, that's nice. There's a C-clip right there. I can see I'll be able to take that all apart, clean it all up, re-lubricate it, put it all back together. But I'm not going to just put it all back together this way. I am going to replace this linkage rod. Look at the corrosion on that. And that's all hogged out there. So that, by the way, can actually come off. If it gets badly worn like that, it can pop off while you're driving, and you'll lose all acceleration. It'll go back to idle, and you put the pedal to the floor, and you'll have nothing. But just to recap what my particular problem is, this is binding. This very stiff on this swivel here, this pivot point. The other reason why you're going to take this all out, by the way, in case you're wondering, is because this ball right here on this year, this stud with the ball on the end for this end of the linkage is pressed into this plate right here. So we're going to have to take that out to put the new one in. All right, got this thing on the workbench. Let's take a look at the anatomy of the beast. Talk about options here. All right, so over here on this lever, we've got not much going on here. We've got the ball, all right, that this end clicks onto, and what happens is there's some sort of like a nylon insert inside here, and apparently that's what wears. So if I click this in like that, okay, if I move this, I don't think that's going to show up really well, but I don't know if you can see that or not, but this really is kind of sloppy in there, okay? So that's not good. The good news is, because this is a nylon insert, the nylon wears, so the steel ball should actually still be in good shape. The reason why that's important is because there's a couple of different ways you can repair this. Let's talk about option number 1, which in my opinion is the least favorite option, which is you can buy a kit online which actually contains all of these parts, practically everything here. It comes with the 2 springs, it comes with this rod, these end pieces, and it even comes with this bracket, okay? And the whole kit is over $400. So there's too many serviceable parts on here in my mind to go hog wild and just blow that kind of money. So the other option is, I was able to find quite a few different websites that sell just this end right here that unscrews. So this is a jam nut, and the way this is supposed to work is you're supposed to be able to loosen this jam nut and actually get this to unthread. And then this one at the other end is probably threads in the opposite direction. So one is probably reverse thread, left-handed thread versus right-handed thread. Anywho, you can buy just these for as little as like $12 to $15 a piece. So if this rod on yours is still in good condition, you can actually just buy these, you reuse these, replace this and this,
and Bob's your uncle, right? Okay. In my situation here, I don't like how corroded this is. This is really rusty here, and I know for a fact that this is bent right now, and it's actually bent pretty easily. So my concern is that because of the age, the rust, and everything else that's going on in here, that this could be a failure point for me in the future. I might not even be able to get these off of here if I wanted to. So I found what I believe is an original Cummins part that actually is an assembly that contains this rod with the ends on it. And actually eBay was the best price I found at $68 with free shipping for what is being purported to be a genuine Cummins part. So I'll just pull this one off on this side. You can look in here. Now what's in there now actually looks like some sort of fluid or something. I, in a vain attempt to try and free up whatever the heck was binding on this thing, sprayed a whole lot of lubricant in various places. So if I put this on, you can see this one is also, you can hear it, it's also loose. So that's no good. So what I want to do is I want to reuse this, replace just this, and reuse this. So this is the tricky part now. I need to see what's going on here with this assembly, because the problem is, the reason why I'm having all of this trouble in the first place is the fact that this is binding. So there's, I don't know if you can appreciate this, but it's very stiff, okay, right here. And I believe that's supposed to just go smoothly, okay. Now this is designed to move separately from this. This is what the spring is there for. Okay, so that's a pretty beefy spring there. So I think what I gotta do is, I see a C-clip here. So let's remove that C-clip and see C-clip, see if we can't figure out what the problem is here. Alright, so there's the C-clip. Washer. There's some sort of interesting clip on the back here. There's also 3 screws that would allow me to separate this assembly from the rest of this. Well, what I'm hoping is, I'm hoping that this whole thing will just slide off of here. Well, it's either stuck on there or that's not the way this comes apart. That's interesting. That whole piece is turning. Huh. Maybe this whole thing will slide out this way if I take this clip off the back, which is fine, except it just leaves me with the question, why, what does this washer and C-clip do? Maybe the washer and C-clip is just to keep this piece, right? Yeah, that washer and C-clip must be just for this piece to keep it captive on this shaft, but then the shaft itself with that piece underneath it must have to come out this way. So let's pop that clip off. Oh, boy, that's rusty. That's probably supposed to be a spring clip, and it's just not springing at all. It's just rust. Wow. Yeah, that is cooked. I'm not going to be able to reuse that. Alright, let's see if that's a washer. It is. Looks like another nylon bushing of some type. That would make sense. Bet you that inside here there is a nylon bushing, and that's what's responsible for supposedly keeping this free moving, lubricated over time. So I think right now that should slide out, and it might just be seized in there from, I mean, it's considering how stuck this is. So I'm wiggling it and pulling on it to see if it's moving. Doesn't seem to be. Let me give it a little persuasion. All right, I found by tapping it gently this way back in and then tapping it out and in and out, working it, that I finally got it to start to move. So now you can see I've got it tapped in almost to where it's flush. But I still might have to actually put a punch on this thing and drive it out. It's going. Well, that's interesting. That little piece of nylon that I was looking at in there is actually just breaking out. That almost looks like it was just a nylon washer. Oh no, that might be the back of a nylon sleeve, like I thought. Yeah, that looks like that's a nylon bushing inside there. Very thin-walled one. I'm not surprised that it has failed if it's that thin wall. Of course, I want to make sure I keep the orientation of this correct when I go to put it back together. Where the ball hooks on down here, where the ball, where this linkage hooks back on is on the bottom, and the bottom of this bracket is this long piece sticking down here. This is going to be up to the right, towards the right. So that's the orientation. Little note to myself, because I'm going to have to wait for these parts to come in. So I'm just pulling and wiggling, and it's coming slowly. The right go, the easier it gets. Yeah, look at that. That's all rust. That's the remnants of, looks like bushing there. Actually, it looks like it's broken. Yeah, it broke. So there we go, knock that out. There we go. Alright, so I gotta go back online and I gotta see if I can't find a part number for this. Well, that's interesting. Maybe this is two pieces, because if this is gonna ring on the back side, so it can't go out, it can't go, the bushing can't go out the back this way with this ring that broke off on the back side, and then this, I could see down in there, this half has a ring also. So this must be a two-piece deal. Yep, that's two pieces. So there's two of these. And all that crud and garbage that's in there is not supposed to be in there. So if that bushing weren't in there and this was all cleaned up, you can imagine this moves nice and easy. All right. Order some parts, and we'll see you next time.